Welcome to the CASA 4x4. This 4x4 is driven by Grahame Dixie, Executive Director of Grow Asia. The 4x4s are 4 expert viewpoints with 4 minutes to share their views. What would you say to private sector investors who are keen to learn the how-to aspects of good investing in agriculture?
What we find about the private sector is there is a myth that they know everything. What we've found is they're just really like sponges. They want to learn. And what they want to learn is not to make the same mistakes as other people, and they want the how-to. They don't seem terribly interested in concepts and so on and so forth. So where would they get that information from? Well, I think that there was a thing called the International Agencies Working Group, which comprised the World Bank, UNCTAD, FAO, and IFAD, who decided to do a series of studies in order to bring from the ground what were the lessons of what works and what didn't work. And one of those was a very interesting study which looked at 178 investments by the Commonwealth Development Corporation in agriculture over a 50-year period, and they opened all their books. So each of those cases were analyzed about whether it's a success or failure, and it brought into the public domain 5 or 6 lessons that hitherto had not been available or had been sort of opaque. And they talked about the risks. They talked about how often the low percentage of businesses which initially covered their cash flow, so they often actually sell the business. And they invest $10 million, they sell it for $5 million to someone else and go away with the tail between their legs. And either that investor or the second investor after that, who have bought these distressed assets, but with that foundation, have managed to turn it to a profitable business. The other thing turned out there were certain examples of business models which were less risky. So that estates, large farming operations, were more risky than a nucleus estate. A nucleus estate is when you have your processing operation and you have a farm surrounding it. And for the financier, he likes that because it means that you've got a guaranteed raw material supply to ensure that your plant will operate. And then from out of that, you have your network of outgrowers. And that proved to be one of the least risky of the operations, partly because they were sensible enough not to make investments with outgrowers until they were pretty sure of the business model. And the smallholder operations was quite risky, not too bad, it depended. And then the other one that came out of that one was that every so often, one of those investments is really transformative. And it, an example would be in the CDC case was that they introduced smallholder tea production in Kenya. Now, smallholder tea production is the major source of supply, and the estate production has been in decline. So those were kind of useful lessons that they started giving people. If you were an investor, it's the first time that you got a sense of what do these investments look like, what are the successes and what are the failures. The second one, which I thought was really fascinating, was there was a thought that if you applied responsible investing to 6 new investments, would this prove that this was a good thing to do? But actually, when you thought about it deeply, you realized, well, it's going to take 8 or 9 years. So actually, we need to accelerate that process. And somebody came up with the brilliant idea that they presented to that group their business case, but what they had done was to retrofit the principles of being a responsible investor to it. And so the approach was to apply to existing mature agribusinesses and see, in retrospect, how responsible had they been? How many of the sort of classic processes that you see in responsible investing had they applied? And then they went to the communities around them and essentially asked them, how was it for you? Third piece, I think, which is really useful, is that the World Bank and UNCTAD particularly looked at those issues, and they came up with 24 working notes. And in that, it highlights and saying, as an investor, these are the things you can do to overcome this issue. So I think those would be a really good starting point, because they're practical and it's field-based research rather than theoretical research. It's the kind of thing which the Harvard Agribusiness School doesn't teach you.
Visit the event page of the CASA website to see recordings of other expert viewpoints shared in the CASA 4x4s and webinar series.